Hey, look at your hand right now. Whatever shade it happens to be, whether you're pale enough to be mistaken for a piece of paper or dark enough to absorb sunlight like a solar panel, that color didn't just come out of nowhere. Welcome to this explainer, where we're going to explore one of the most dramatic, strange, and absolutely incredible biological makeovers in the entire history of life on Earth.
To really wrap our heads around this, we have to look at natural selection for what it actually is. It's a very slow, very ruthless optimization algorithm, right? It doesn't care about aesthetics or beauty. It only runs one calculation over and over again. Does this trait help you survive? And dark skin, as we're about to see, was essentially a biological superweapon. It had a 5-star evolutionary rating. So why on earth would our species ever abandon a perfectly evolved trait?
Okay, let's dive into this. Skin color is absolutely not a social construct, and it is definitely not a biological accident. As this quote beautifully captures, it was a survival story, a slow-motion biological negotiation between your ancestors and the sun. It's a reaction to a surprisingly indifferent and honestly, sometimes completely rude star sitting 93 million miles away. The sun wasn't playing fair, and our ancestors had to adapt or die.
To set our baseline here, we've got to rewind exactly 300,000 years. Back when Homo sapiens first appeared in Africa, every single one of our ancestors had dark skin. There were literally no pale populations anywhere on the planet. The whole concept of light skin, it didn't even exist yet. Dark skin was the original default blueprint of our entire species.
Section 1. Surviving the African sun. The invisible, relentless threats of equatorial UV radiation.
To understand why this original blueprint was so necessary, we can't treat skin like it's just the packaging our bodies come in. It's your largest organ, and it is doing some seriously heavy lifting. Enter melanin. Melanin is basically a natural, built-in, always-on UV filter. The more melanin your skin contains, the darker it appears, and the more effectively it acts as a literal biological sunscreen. Under that intense equatorial African sun, this shield blocked UV radiation from penetrating deep into tissue, which prevented devastating, cancer-causing DNA mutations like melanoma.
But, cancer prevention is actually only half the story here. There was another, lesser-known, but arguably much more critical threat from UV radiation. And it has to do with a tiny, invisible molecule called folate, or vitamin B9. This molecule flows right through your bloodstream doing essential biological maintenance, and it is absolutely crucial for early embryonic development.
So the crucial point is that UV radiation literally destroys folate. When that intense African sun penetrated the skin, it would just break down these folate molecules right in the bloodstream. And for pregnant women, a lack of folate means the embryonic neural tube fails to close. That leads to catastrophic developmental abnormalities and drastically increases the rate of miscarriages. Having high melanin wasn't just a nice perk, it was deeply, powerfully non-negotiable if you wanted to ensure the survival of your offspring.
Section 2. The vitamin D crisis. The lethal cost of the northern migration.
Think about it. If dark skin was the ultimate shield, what happens when you take that shield out of the fire? Between 70,000 and 100,000 years ago, human populations began this slow, generational drift out of Africa and headed north. And the environment completely flipped. They went from the intense, inescapable UV of equatorial Africa to the weak, filtered, overcast skies of northern Europe and Asia. Suddenly, instead of needing to block relentless radiation, humans desperately needed to absorb whatever weak sunlight they could possibly find. Dark skin had instantly turned from a massive advantage into a massive liability.
And this brings us to the crisis. Your skin is essentially a solar panel that uses UV sunlight to manufacture vitamin D. But up on the north, highly efficient melanin was blocking way too much of that weak sun. The consequences? Basically a total bodily failure. Without vitamin D, your body can't absorb calcium. So children developed severe rickets, leaving them with bowed legs and flattened skulls. Adult women developed osteomalacia, which is softened pelvic bones, making childbirth extraordinarily dangerous and often fatal. Evolution's ruthless algorithm had to reverse its inputs, and it had to do it quickly.
Section 3. The farming fast forward. The sudden dietary collapse that changed our DNA. Now, you might think this depigmentation happened super slowly over hundreds of thousands of years, but prepare for a major plot twist. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is just how shockingly recent pale skin actually is. Even 10,000 years ago, ancient DNA from a specimen known as Cheddarman in Britain shows that he had dark skin and blue eyes. The widespread, extremely fair skin we associate with Northern Europeans today, that only really spread in the last 6,000 to 8,000 years. That's less than the last 3% of our history. So what hit the fast forward button?
The answer is the Neolithic Revolution, the switch to farming. And the contrast here is pretty stark. Hunter-gatherers were eating fatty fish, organ meats, shellfish. Their diet was naturally pumping them full of vitamin D, which totally made up for the lack of sun. But when early farmers switched to grains like wheat, barley, oats, and rye, their dietary vitamin D intake didn't just drop, it completely collapsed. They became entirely dependent on whatever their skin could synthesize.
And because farming communities were dense, sedentary, and connected in large networks, an advantageous mutation, like slightly lighter skin, could spread incredibly fast. It acted like an evolutionary fast-forward button. The dietary collapse, combined with massive population sizes, completely intensified the selection pressure. In just a few millennia, pale skin swept across these regions just to save these populations from vitamin D starvation.
Section 4. Genetics of skin color, the polygenic response to latitude.
Let's look under the hood for a second, because skin color isn't controlled by a single, simple on or off gene. It's polygenic. And this brilliantly illustrates the sheer power of convergent evolution. Both East Asians and Europeans have significantly lighter skin than equatorial Africans, but they arrived at that exact same adaptive solution using completely different genetic pathways. When natural selection keeps reinventing the exact same answer from scratch on completely different continents, that's the strongest signal biology can give you that this trait really mattered for survival.
Actually, here's a super quick, mind-bending fact while we're in the genetic neighborhood. Every single person alive today with blue eyes descends from one specific individual who lived near the Black Sea roughly 6,000 to 10,000 years ago. Traits that we often view as ancient, fixed, or primordial are, historically speaking, brand new. Blue eyes are literally younger than the invention of agriculture. Crazy, right?
Section 5. A UV calibration system, redefining the way we see human skin.
So let's bring this all together. Today, modern civilization has totally thrown a wrench into this whole process. We've got vitamin D supplements, broad-spectrum sunscreen, fortified foods, and heated houses. We have essentially decoupled our skin biology from its original strict survival function. Make no mistake, the evolutionary algorithm is still quietly running in the background, but we humans, we've completely changed the inputs.
Which brings us to our final thought. The exact same sun that drove some populations to develop more melanin to survive its deadly radiation drove other populations to develop less melanin to absorb its limited energy. Dark skin is our shared ancestral baseline. Lighter skin is simply a geographic modification. Every single skin tone that exists today is just an answer to a question asked by a star. So, as we continue to change our environments and build technologies to shield ourselves, what environmental questions will our DNA be forced to answer next? Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer. I'll see you on the next one.